I'm Alex Williams, enterprise writer with TechCrunch, here at the Open Compute Summit with Frankovsky.
How you doing?
Of Facebook, who basically, this is your baby, isn't it?
It's our baby.
It's our baby. That wasn't a trick question.
Yeah, it's awesome to see how far it's come in just the first 18 months. So
it's like things just are like popping up. It's like, it's like sitting down, you're like listening to things, and someone was telling me that they were checking things out last night, and they're like, we didn't know that this was going to be here. We didn't know they were going to do this, and now suddenly Purdue's here, and they're working on projects. That's almost like the embodiment of an open source community.
Yeah. I mean, and we still have a lot to learn about how to run an open source community and develop a community around hardware, because it is really unique in the sense that we're applying those open source principles to the hardware space, but. The amount of what I call this kind of virtuous cycle of development that's happening around some of the specifications that we've put out into the open is surprising me.
Let's go through the virtuous cycle maybe then, because I mean, and how you would see it kind of going around in that circle from point to point to point to point to point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great examples that we highlighted this morning and is on demonstration downstairs is the Open Vault specification that we put out, right? So it was the first, open source hardware, storage hardware that had been placed out into the opencompute.org website. And, traditionally you have a storage device and then you have a server that actually controls the disks that sit in that storage device. And some people in the community like Calzada and Intel and YWin got really creative, and they were like, hey, you've got these two SAS expanders in this device. What if you took one of those out and put in a low-powered server in that same form factor? Right. And so that's
because they're
really
small
cool.
enough now, because we can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And we had never thought of that, and they did, right? And they went and built it. I was also walking around last night, and I saw YWin, another OCP partner, who had taken the Winterfell sleds, which are the web server half-width motherboards that we put out into the open, and they had a number of customers approaching them saying, we can't move to the open rack standard yet because it's a different rack type, and we're kind of stuck with our legacy racks, but we want some OCP stuff in our environment. And so YWin took those Winterfell sleds and put them into more of a standard 19-inch kind of form factor. And it was just really cool to see all the things that are coming out of just being more open about sharing stuff.
Winterfell, that's Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The code name Winterfell,
right? How come you codenamed it Winterfell after Game of Thrones?
The team comes up with all of our code names. So but it did encourage me to start watching Game of Thrones. So
it's quite a show.
Yeah.
I wanted to, one thing I've been really thinking about, and I wrote a story about this yesterday, that essentially, in my view, you guys are managing more than 1 billion users, right? And their personal information and how they share information and such. You're trying to build a publicly traded company on top of that infrastructure, and you have all the algorithms and upwards of the stack, so you can so you can use data as that special sauce, right? Like to send it out to either for search or whatever, or for sharing photos or for whatever means. You basically have to do this, don't you? Don't you basically have to engage in a collaborative, open process? Because there's really no way, I don't see how a company can do this themselves anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a have to, but I do think, and I think one of the reasons why the Open Compute project has gained so much momentum so quickly is because there are a lot of consumers of technology that know what they need to meet their specific workload requirements. And the ecosystem prior to Open Compute was just never set up for those end users to actually influence the technology and how it was going to be put back into their environment, right? And so it's not necessarily a have to, but it's more of a need to get the pace of technology to move faster to keep up with these workloads that are growing faster than the hardware technology was growing.
If you didn't have this Open Compute project, could you move as fast?
Facebook alone could move as fast,
You could have the same level of innovation. Could you have the same partnerships that you do? Do you think you could have those kind of capabilities where, we're seeing like Intel and, working together on, on the 100 gigabit per second?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less a question about how fast Facebook could move without OCP, but more a question of how fast the industry would move without OCP. And what I mean by that is, prior to open compute, the industry, the hardware industry specifically invests, millions and millions of dollars in research and development every year. And in many cases, they do that on a speculative basis because they never get a really clean signal from the consumers about, if you build that, I'm interested in that, right? They have a lot of one-off discussions with a number of different consumers, and one of the roles that Open Compute plays is a more consolidated voice from this community saying, hey, we think that's strategic. We think based on where we see our requirements going, if you build that, there's a much better opportunity for you to bring that into our environment. So now the industry is willing to move forward faster because it takes that completely speculative investment and makes it a little less speculative because they're getting this cleaner signal from the open compute community.
It makes sense, right? I mean, it makes sense to do this. And it seems like with just the scaling amount of data that everyone is facing, then maybe you don't have to come together and do this, but it sure helps.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the pace of innovation in the way people interact with the internet is so much faster than the pace that the hardware technology was on, right? So that void.
Tell me about that pace.
Well, actually Tim O'Reilly talked a little bit about it today, right? Where the pace today is incredible, and that's why our work today is really important. But the pace of that is bound by how fast humans can interact, right? And if we think about how interconnected devices are going to start talking to one another and becoming more interconnected, well, then you have kind of a limitless amount of interconnectedness. And how are the data centers and the physical infrastructure going to keep up with that, right? And so the work that we're doing today and obviously into the future becomes increasingly important because these data centers are going to be the hub of all that activity. And the activity rate is just growing so quickly, and the types of services that companies are providing to end users and the way people want to interact with the internet and get information is just out of control, crazy. It's awesome, right? People change and really, really quickly, and that's part of the Open Compute mission is to try and shrink that impedance gap, right, between the way people interact, the way software interacts, and then there was hardware way down here, right? There was software that was iterating really quickly, usage patterns that people were changing very quickly, but then hardware was always kind of lagging behind, and as a hardware designer, to try and close that gap, between the speed of software and the speed of how fast humans change to how fast does hardware change, right? And that's really where Open Compute has given the hardware industry
it helps
a boost.
Move a little faster so that the software can run appropriately.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think any user will see that on their Android device, for instance, where the hardware now isn't keeping up, right? I mean, if you have an older Android OS, you'll find that your memory is, you don't have enough memory there, so yours kind of like, force and close applications and clearing data out. And now we're at the point where we need to kind of further accelerate that. Is this something you're seeing upward as well? I mean, we're starting to see more hardware hackathons, for instance, where Raspberry Pi, people doing things like a TechCrunch Disrupt, we had that. And you guys are having this data center hackathon, which I think has to be the first one ever.
I think it might be.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see what comes out of it. We've got the hackers are working on stuff right now, and we're going to be reviewing all that tonight and tomorrow. And whoever comes up with the coolest idea, the first prize is going to be either that the foundation will fund a provisional patent for them if they choose to go that route, or we'll bring that idea into the prototype phase for them. So. That is just another, between, you mentioned Purdue and the university engagement we have and getting some of these bright young minds focused on these challenges that we have in this increasing complexity and scale of the internet. Hackathons is another part of just, bring your ideas, share your ideas, let's go hack on it together and see what comes out, right? And that's the cool thing is there's ideas, that I had never envisioned, and people are just taking these small kernels of ideas, these building blocks of OCP, and then modifying them in ways that I had never envisioned before.
Right. On a last note, where does Open Compute go from here? You have 12 new members who signed up. You have, a stronger relationship with Intel than I'm sure you did 6 months or 12 months ago, just in terms of what you're announcing. And we're seeing, a lot of, new kind of work and new community build out of this. What's next for Open Compute over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see momentum in the way the technology supply base engages in an open source world. That's why I think it's so significant. Intel's contributions today, for example, just 18 months ago, no hardware supplier was thinking about open sourcing any sort of technology in their environment, right? So I think we're going to continue to see more technology suppliers thinking differently and viewing the Open Compute project as a more strategic engagement for them and how they best serve the consumer base. So I think that's going to continue. The other thing that I'm excited about is we're going to establish these engineering workshops. So as you saw today, this has become a really, really big event. And the engineering workshops, we're doing those today at the tech breakout sessions and tomorrow, but the real work, the tangible work that comes out of Open Compute is all about these engineering workshops. And so we're going to have, in between the big Open Compute summits, we're going to have these workshops that are going to be, and we're actually hoping that universities will invite us, so they'll maybe host us at their campuses and maybe even use their classroom facilities and have all of the project teams come together and do the engineering work in between the Open Compute summits. So I really think those are some of the key things that are happening. Just more technology contributions from hardware suppliers, more engagement amongst the engineering community and amongst the university groups. Also, international expansion. We talked about our first international chapter with the Asia Pacific chapter. I think there's a huge amount of interest outside of the U.S.
The rise of Asia is interesting.
It's really, really interesting. And actually the first people to approach us about the project were from Japan. And they just have a tremendous amount of understanding and knowledge about what their specific needs are. And so they immediately saw Open Compute as an opportunity to say, hey, look, I've got different needs over here. Maybe it's the cost of my real estate or the seismic zone that I'm in. And they've got big challenges there in deploying IT. And so they're now taking Open Compute and using those building blocks to build something specific for their region of the world.
They must be very interested in things like, low power servers and ARM architectures and, the capability to really consolidate.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's interesting when I say, the cleaner signal to the supply base. Everybody has their unique needs, but I think where we're focused is on let's innovate where it really matters. There's a common base of requirements across a number of different customers, but then everybody's got, a slightly different requirement. So it's not this one-size-fits-all kind of methodology of bringing product to the market just wasn't working as efficiently as it could have worked before.
You have to adapt. Frank, thank you very much for taking some time. It's great to be here at your event. It's resounding success. Congratulations on that, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.